Professor Lazarus Korn stared at his reflection in the polished surface of his desk terminal, adjusting the ceremonial collar that marked him as a senior xenobiologist at the Galactic Academy of Advanced Species Studies. 27 years. 27 years of building his reputation as the foremost authority on species classification across the known universe. And today was his favorite day of the academic cycle. Professor, your lecture begins in 12 minutes. His assistant poked 3 eye stalks through the doorway. Thank you, Nob. I'm aware of the time. Lazarus didn't bother looking up. Is the presentation loaded? Yes, sir. And your special effects for the human section. Lazarus allowed his secondary mouth to curve into what his species considered a smile. Excellent. Excellent. The annual Mythological Species of the Universe lecture was his masterpiece. Over 400 students from across the galaxy would attend, eager to hear the renowned Professor Korn systematically dismantle the galaxy's most persistent biological myths. The lecture had become so popular that the Academy now broadcast it live to 17 affiliated institutions. Your water with extra calcium, sir. Nob placed the container on the desk with a nervous flutter of appendages. For the love of science, Nob, how many times must I tell you? It's calcium with water. The proper ratio is essential. Lazarus snatched the container, measuring its contents with a critical eye. This will have to do, I suppose. Lazarus gathered his materials, mentally reviewing the highlights of today's lecture. He would begin with the ridiculous space dragons of the Cygnus sector, move through the telepathic coral of Betelgeuse, and finish with his crowning achievement, the complete scientific debunking of humans. The very notion made his epidermis ripple with amusement. Humans. Bipedal mammals with no exoskeleton, minimal sensory apparatus, and supposedly from some backwater planet called Earth. As if evolution would create such inefficient, vulnerable creatures. And yet the myths persisted, cropping up in the most unusual places. Professor, it's time. Nob's voice quivered with reverence. Lazarus straightened his posture, exuding academic superiority. Then let us educate the masses, shall we? The Galactic Academy of Advanced Species Studies stood as the crown jewel of Nexalus Prime, its crystalline spires reaching toward the 3 purple moons that orbited the planet. Founded 8,000 years ago, after the Great Unification, the Academy had become the intellectual center of the known universe. Its architecture reflected the perfect geometric precision valued by the 17 founding species, every angle calculated to stimulate optimal cognitive function, every corridor designed to accommodate beings from gaseous clouds to silicon-based quadrupeds. The Grand Amphitheater, located in the Academy's central dome, could seat over 1,000 students. Today, it was filled nearly to capacity. Beings of all descriptions filed in through the various environmental entrances. Methane breathers entered through special chambers on the left. Silicon-based life forms passed through decontamination fields on the right. Photosynthetic attendees positioned themselves near the artificial sunlight panels overhead. "Look at them all," muttered Blix Taro, Professor Korn's teaching assistant, as he nervously adjusted the molecular stabilizer on his uniform. Blix was a Ventusian, a species known for their exceptional memory and perpetual anxiety. Even the Chancellor is attending today. Lazarus Korn noted with satisfaction the Chancellor's distinctive tentacled form undulating in the reserved front row. Of course he is. My lecture series has increased applications to the Xenobiology department by 68%. From his position in the preparation chamber, Lazarus could observe the audience without being seen. His 4 hearts swelled with pride. 7 published research compilations, 42 speaking engagements annually across the galaxy, 3 prestigious Zolan prizes for excellence in xenobiological studies, and today, once again, he would cement his reputation as the voice of scientific reason against the tide of superstitious nonsense. Professor, Blix's voice dropped to a whisper, his color changing, skin shifting to a worried yellow. "There's something you should know." "What is it now, Blix?" I'm preparing my opening thoughts. We have unexpected guests today. Blix's thin fingers tapped rapidly on his datapad. The registration system shows 3 attendees who didn't specify their species classification. Lazeks waved a dismissive limb. Probably more of those annoying cosmic cloud entities. They never fill out forms correctly. I don't think so, sir. Security says they came in through the oxygen-nitrogen entrance, and Blix's voice faltered. And what? And they asked where they could get snacks before the show. Lazek snorted. Typical undergraduate behavior. It hardly matters. My lecture will proceed as planned. The announcement chimes rang through the chamber, signaling the start of the session. Professor Quorn straightened his academic robes, adopted his most authoritative posture, and prepared to dazzle the assembled minds with his brilliance. Introducing. Boomed the automated announcement system, the galaxy's foremost authority on species classification, 12-time recipient of the Galactic Scientific Excellence Award, Professor Lazek Quorn. Professor Lazek Quorn glided onto the central platform with practiced dignity. His hover mechanism adjusted to the precise height that psychological studies had proven most effective for commanding respect from varied species. The platform rose and rotated slowly, ensuring every being in the amphitheater could observe his distinguished purple-gray hide and the impressive ridge of academic knowledge nodes protruding from his cranial crest. Esteemed colleagues, dedicated students, and curious minds of all biological compositions, he began, his voice modulator perfectly calibrated. Welcome to the 43rd Annual Lecture on Mythological Species of the Universe. A respectful murmur rippled through the audience. Several bioluminescent beings pulsed in appreciation. Science. Lazeks declared, raising 2 of his primary appendages. Science is the eternal enemy of superstition. Yet, despite our advanced civilizations, despite our faster-than-light travel and molecular replication technology, we still find ourselves plagued by stories. He pronounced the word as if it tasted foul. The holographic display behind him activated, showing a massive serpentine creature surrounded by stars. The so-called space dragons of Cygnus. Lazek snorted through his respiratory vents, supposedly large enough to swallow starships whole, yet somehow evading all sensor detection. And my personal favorite detail, they allegedly breathe fire. In space. He paused for effect. Yes, combustion? In the vacuum of space. Brilliant. Scattered laughter spread through the audience. Next, we have the telepathic coral of Betelgeuse. The display shifted to show vibrant reef structures, allegedly capable of communicating mathematically complex ideas directly into the minds of passing travelers. Fascinating how these telepathic experiences only occur after explorers have been exposed to the hallucinogenic spores that coincidentally grow all over this region. More laughter, louder this time. A group of tentacled students in the middle rows vibrated in what passed for their version of applause. But today, Lazek's voice dropped dramatically. Today we arrive at the most persistent, most ridiculous mythological species of all. He pressed a control, and the hologram shifted to display a bipedal figure, the legendary humans. The word boomed through the amphitheater, followed by a special audio effect, a sound the Academy's archives suggested resembled ancient tribal drums from primitive worlds. Supposedly native to a planet called Earth in some unremarkable solar system, these humans represent the pinnacle of biological impossibility. Lazeks began circling the hologram, pointing out its features with undisguised mockery. Observe, no exoskeleton whatsoever, internal bone structure that would shatter under minimal impact, skin so thin it tears against the slightest abrasion, only 2 eyes positioned on the same side of the head, no echolocation, no infrared vision, pathetic muscular development. He gestured to a chart showing supposed human biological metrics. According to the myths, these creatures achieved spaceflight despite having an average lifespan of less than 100 solar cycles. Their respiratory system is so inefficient they require constant oxygen. They fuel their bodies by consuming other organisms and chemically breaking them down inside their bodies. A process so wasteful it defies rational evolution. Lazarus paused, surveying his captivated audience. And yet, the most absurd claim of all these humans apparently developed advanced technology without possessing any natural advantages whatsoever. No wings for aerial perspective, no gills for underwater exploration. Just these pathetic appendages they call hands. The professor's secondary mouth curved into his signature sneer. Today we will examine the origins of this particularly persistent myth, trace its development across various cultural contexts, and once and for all establish why humans cannot and do not exist. The earliest recorded mention of these fictional humans appears in trade records from. A sharp, barking sound cut through Professor Korn's carefully modulated lecture. It came from the back of the amphitheater, a sound so unexpected and foreign that the entire audience turned as one mass. "Ha, sorry about that," called a voice that somehow managed to be both apologetic and entirely unembarrassed. "Please continue. This is fascinating stuff." Lazek squinted his four primary eyes toward the disturbance. In the back row, barely visible in the dimmed lighting, sat three figures. They weren't floating, or hovering, or undulating, or photosynthesizing. They were just sitting on the seats, like primitive organisms. As I was saying, Lazarus continued, his voice slightly less confident, humans were likely invented as cautionary tales by early space explorers to... Another interruption. This time it was a crunching sound, followed by what appeared to be the passing of a container between the three figures. "These cheese puffs are amazing," said another voice, slightly deeper than the first. "Want some, Nell?" "Throw one over," replied the first voice. Lazarus's lecture platform froze mid-rotation. "Excuse me," he said, his tone shifting from academic to administrative. "There is no consumption of nutrition during lectures. Academy Policy, Section 4, Paragraph. Or bad." The central figure stood up, and the overhead lights caught its form clearly for the first time. Bipedal, approximately 1.7 meters tall, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head with facial features arranged exactly like the hologram currently displayed behind Lazarus. It was wearing some sort of blue uniform with insignia Lazarus didn't recognize. "Some prankster students," Lazarus muttered to himself, regaining composure, "wearing costumes to mock my lecture. Juvenile but predictable." The figure, the human, was now walking down the steps toward the central platform, followed by its two companions. One was slightly taller with darker coloration, the other shorter with a different body shape. Blix rushed to Lazarus's side. "Professor," he whispered urgently, "our bioscanners are reading them as unknown species. They're not registered in the database." The lead figure reached the edge of the presentation area and smiled, showing blunt, inefficient teeth. "Captain Nell Yardley, United Earth Alliance." She extended a 5-digited appendage toward Lazarus. "Gotta say, Professor, your description of us is spot on in some ways. We are pretty fragile compared to most species we've met." Lazarus's epidermis began to dry out in stress response. "This is impossible," he whispered, his academic certainty crumbling before his eyes. Nell Yardley grinned wider. "Well, apparently not." Professor Lazarus Korn drew himself up to his full height, extending his neck ridge to its most impressive display, a biological reaction triggered by extreme stress in his species. The lecture hall had erupted into chaos. Students were emitting alarm pheromones, changing colors, and in the case of the gaseous entities near the ceiling, rapidly cycling through density states. Silence. Lazarus's voice boomed through the amplification system. "This is clearly an elaborate hoax meant to disrupt serious academic discourse." The lead human leaned casually against the edge of the presentation stage, arms crossed. "Sorry to crash your party, Professor. We were in the neighborhood, heard about this famous lecture series debunking our existence, and thought, hey, why not drop by? They cannot be real humans. Lazex hissed to Blix. Run a molecular scan immediately. Blix's trembling appendages worked the scanner. Sir, the results are inconclusive. Their biological makeup doesn't match anything in our database. The second human stepped forward, adjusting some kind of device on his wrist. Science Officer Thomas Jackson, he announced, with a small bow that somehow seemed both respectful and slightly mocking. Your database wouldn't have human DNA yet. We're kind of new to the galactic neighborhood. And I'm Rio Kapoor, Engineering, added the third, who was now examining the holographic projector with obvious interest. Cool tech you've got here. Mind if I take a look at how it works? Do not touch the Academy equipment. Lazex screeched, his composure slipping further. No problem, no problem. Rio raised her hands in surrender, but continued inspecting the device with her eyes. Just professional curiosity. Captain Yardley pulled a small, wrapped object from her pocket. Protein bar? She offered to Lazex. You look like you could use something. Your color's gone all patchy. The ripple of what might have been laughter spread through the more courageous students in the audience. Others remained frozen in shock or had assumed defensive postures. This is a serious academic institution. Lazex sputtered. Not some intergalactic sideshow. Oh, we're taking it seriously, Captain Yardley assured him, though her mouth kept curving upward in that disturbing manner. Just because we joke around doesn't mean we're not listening. Right, Jackson? The science officer, who had been scanning the audience with obvious fascination, nodded. Absolutely. For example, I counted 73 distinct species in this room, including 17 oxygen breathers, 22 methane processors, and at least one photosynthetic colony organism. That's impressive diversity. How did you even get past Academy security? Lazex demanded. We walked in, Rio Kapoor said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. We registered online like everyone else. Your form didn't have human in the species drop-down, so we just left it blank. From the front row, Chancellor Vorx rose on his tentacles, enormous compound eyes blinking rapidly in what Lazex recognized as intense scientific curiosity. Professor Quorn, perhaps instead of dismissing these visitors, we should seize this unprecedented research opportunity? Lazex felt his academic reputation disintegrating before his eyes. But Chancellor, my lecture series, The Mythological, the scientific evidence clearly shows. Seems like the evidence just walked through the door, Prof. Captain Yardley said with a wink that sent horrified shivers down Lazex's spine. Professor Lazex Quorn adjusted his academic robes with as much dignity as he could muster. After a brief recess called by the Chancellor, during which Lazex consumed 3 anxiety suppression tablets, the lecture had resumed. Except now, instead of his carefully planned academic dismantling of mythological species, he was facing 3 living specimens of what should have been fiction. As I was explaining before the interruption, Lazex continued stiffly, the concept of humans has always been scientifically dubious because their alleged biology is fundamentally inefficient. Captain Nell Yardley raised her hand like a student. Sorry to interrupt again, but I'd like to correct a few points on your slide there. This is not a dialogue, visitor. This is a lecture, Lazex said through gritted mouthparts. Right, but that diagram shows our respiratory system completely wrong, Thomas Jackson chimed in, pointing at the hologram. You've got our lungs connected directly to our digestive tract, which would be problematic, to say the least. Lazex flicked his appendage dismissively. Even if such creatures as yourselves exist, which I'm not entirely convinced of despite appearances, the fact remains that a species with your biological limitations could never achieve advanced technology or spaceflight. Rio Kapoor snorted. Yeah, about that? Our ship's parked in orbit. We'd be happy to give you a tour later. The audience murmured excitedly. Several recording devices whirred. Impossible. Lazex insisted. Your alleged species lacks natural defenses against radiation, extreme temperatures, or vacuum exposure. Space travel would kill you instantly. Ever heard of spacesuits, Professor? Yardley grinned. Or ships with life support systems. We adapt our environment rather than waiting for evolution to adapt us. That's cheating, Lazix blurted out before he could stop himself. The laughter that rippled through the amphitheater made his knowledge nodes throb with humiliation. Science isn't about playing fair, Jackson said, not unkindly. It's about solving problems creatively. When we needed to see in the dark, we didn't evolve night vision, we invented flashlights. When we needed to fly, we built airplanes. Lazix regrouped, determined to reassert his academic authority. But your brain capacity? My research clearly shows your neural processing capabilities are inferior to 17 documented sentient species. Quality over quantity, Professor, Rio said, pulling out a small device from her pocket. Within seconds, she had somehow interfaced it with the Academy's projection system. The hologram shifted to display a complex mathematical equation. We compensate with efficient problem solving. This is how we calculated faster than light travel using relatively simple technology. Several academic specialists in the audience leaned forward, captivated. And while we may not have natural armor, Yardley added, rolling up her sleeve to reveal a nasty scar, we heal remarkably well. Took a plasma blast on SCIFI last year. Doctor said I'd lose the arm. 3 months later, I was back on duty. But your emotional responses are clearly unstable. Lazix protested, grasping at straws now. Your constant joking and inappropriate behavior demonstrates psychological immaturity. Jackson laughed. Actually, humor is one of our greatest survival mechanisms. When faced with impossible odds or terrifying situations, humans often resort to jokes. It reduces stress hormones and promotes group cohesion. And speaking of group cohesion, Rio added, we're particularly good at forming social bonds across species barriers. Half our diplomatic corps specializes in interspecies relationships. Lazix's frustration reached a breaking point. If you're so adaptable and resilient, then prove it. Anyone can make claims. The three humans exchanged glances. Yardley's mouth curved into what Lazix was beginning to recognize as a dangerous expression. Professor, she said sweetly, are you challenging us to a demonstration? The audience erupted in excited clicks, whistles, and pheromone releases. Too late, Lazix realized he had walked directly into their trap. Fine. Professor Quorn snapped, his professional demeanor cracking under the pressure. If you insist on disrupting my lecture, let's settle this scientifically. 3 tests to demonstrate this supposed human resilience you claim makes your species viable. Captain Yardley's eyes lit up with an emotion. Lazix couldn't quite identify something between amusement and predatory interest. We accept. What did you have in mind, Professor? Lazix considered for a moment, then gestured to his assistant. Blix, bring the environmental simulator. Blix wheeled forward a large dome-shaped device used for testing species adaptability. Lazix felt a surge of confidence. This was his area of expertise, after all. First test, temperature extremes. Most sentient species can tolerate a variation of no more than 30 degrees without specialized adaptations, Lazix announced to the now completely engrossed audience. The simulator will fluctuate between environments. Sounds fun, Jackson said, stepping forward and rolling up his sleeves. I grew up in northern Canada. -40 in winter, 35 degrees in summer. Degrees in what scale? Lazix asked suspiciously. Celsius. The audience gasped. Most species would die at such variations. Jackson entered the chamber. Blix activated the sequence. The temperature plunged, then soared, then plunged again. Through the transparent dome, they could see Jackson standing calmly, occasionally rubbing his arms or wiping sweat from his brow, but showing no signs of distress. "He's fine," Blix reported, checking the readings with disbelief. Second test. Lazex practically shouted when Jackson emerged looking barely inconvenienced. Toxin resistance. Lazex hastily assembled a tray of substances known to be harmful to most organic life forms. Nothing lethal, but definitely incapacitating. Your species supposedly consumes these for pleasure. Rio Kapoor examined the tray, picking up various items. Caffeine, alcohol, capsaicin. Oh, is that chocolate? Don't mind if I do. Before Lazex could stop her, she had consumed samples of each, explaining cheerfully to the horrified audience, "Coffee gets us going in the morning. Alcohol helps us relax. Spicy food tastes amazing. And chocolate? Pure joy." The methane breathers in the audience released bubbles of shock when she remained standing, apparently unaffected by what should have been a cocktail of toxins. Final test. Lazex's voice had risen several octaves, problem-solving under pressure. He activated the Academy's training puzzle, a complex, three-dimensional logic sequence that required multiple solutions simultaneously. Most Academy graduates needed at least 40 minutes to solve it. He set the timer for 5 minutes. "Oh, I love puzzles," Captain Yardley exclaimed, approaching the holographic interface. What happened next defied all of Lazex's expectations. Instead of methodically working through the sequence, Yardley immediately started trying solutions that seemed completely random. Several times she hit dead ends and had to backtrack. But rather than becoming frustrated, she laughed and tried even more unorthodox approaches. "Is she guessing?" Blix whispered, horrified by such an unscientific method. "Waldlow's ways would have won an eon's courage." Not guessing, Yardley called over her shoulder, somehow having heard the whisper. Intuitive problem-solving. Sometimes you need to try the wrong answer to find the right one. With 30 seconds to spare, the puzzle chimed its completion tone. The amphitheater erupted in a cacophony of impressed sounds from 100 different species. Even the Chancellor was waving his tentacles in what appeared to be applause. Lazex stared at the humans, his worldview disintegrating around him. "This changes everything," he said faintly, collapsing into his hover chair. "All my research, my theories." "If it helps," Rio said kindly, offering him a bottle of water. "We thought a lot of the stories about your species were myths too. Until we met you. The grand amphitheater of the Galactic Academy had transformed from an orderly lecture hall into something resembling a multi-species carnival. Students had abandoned all pretense of academic decorum, crowding around the three humans with an enthusiasm that made Professor Lazex Korn's knowledge nodes throb painfully. "And you're saying you sleep? For 8 hours consecutively?" asked a fascinated student composed entirely of luminous gas. "A third of your life spent unconscious? Extraordinary." "What happens if one of your limbs is severed?" inquired a silicon-based hexapod, manipulating its own detachable appendage for comparison. "Could you explain again how you reproduce?" questioned a budding entity, its translator struggling with the concept. Lazex sat slumped in his hover chair, surrounded by the scattered remnants of his lecture notes. 27 years of research. 4 comprehensive textbooks. Countless peer-reviewed articles. All of it needed to be completely rewritten. Chancellor Vorx undulated over to Lazex, his excitement palpable. "Professor Korn, this is the most significant xenobiological discovery in 3 centuries. Your name will be forever associated with the formal documentation of humanity." "My name," Lazex muttered, "will be forever associated with being catastrophically wrong." Nonsense. The Chancellor's tentacles waved dismissively. "This is science at its finest. A hypothesis disproven by new evidence. We must immediately establish a new department, Human Studies. And you, of course, will chair it." Before Lazex could protest, a group of students floated over, their bioluminescence pulsing with excitement. "Professor Korn, this was the best lecture ever," chirped one, while another added, We've already started a petition to invite the humans back for a full symposium. Across the amphitheater, the humans were demonstrating something they called arm wrestling to a group of tentacled academics. Captain Yardley apparently winning despite her opponent having 6 limbs and 3 times her muscle mass. "How is this possible?" Lazex whispered to Blix, who looked equally stunned. "I've been analyzing their demonstrations, Professor. It seems their adaptability isn't just technological, it's ingrained in their thought processes, and they don't follow predictable patterns. When faced with a superior force, they change tactics instantly. When conventional approaches fail, they try something completely unexpected." As if to illustrate Blix's point, Rio Kapoor had somehow reprogrammed the environmental simulator to display what she called Earth weather patterns, causing a small rain cloud to form inside the Academy's carefully controlled atmosphere. Several photosynthetic students extended their fronds into the moisture with delighted coos. "The entire academic board wants to meet them," Blix continued. "The biochemistry department is analyzing the coffee sample. The evolutionary studies group is demanding genetic samples. Even the philosophical ethics department is involved. They're debating whether human unpredictability represents a new form of intelligence." Lazex watched as Jackson casually explained human music to a group of sound-sensitive beings, using nothing but rhythmic tapping on the lecture podium. The beings vibrated in what appeared to be pleasure. "They're everywhere," Lazex said weakly. "The Academy's daily schedule is completely disrupted. 3 beings have upended centuries of established protocol." "That appears to be another human trait," Blix observed, "creating chaos wherever they go, yet somehow making everyone enjoy it." A datapad appeared in front of Lazex, held by Chancellor Vorks. "Initial approval for your new research grant, Professor. The board has allocated unlimited resources for your comprehensive study of humanity." Lazex stared at the pad, then at the humans who had, in the span of 2 hours, completely transformed his career and the Academy itself. "I suppose," he said with a sigh of resignation, "I should begin by admitting I was wrong." 1 week later, Professor Lazex Korn stood in the Academy's docking bay, clutching a hastily packed research kit and staring at the sleek human vessel before him. The ship USS Serendipity, according to the markings, looked absurdly simplistic compared to standard galactic designs. No visible quantum stabilizers, no dimensional fold compensators, just metal and glass and what appeared to be painted decoration. "Ready for your field research, Professor?" Captain Yardley's voice called from the boarding ramp. "I still cannot believe I agreed to this," Lazex muttered, his ceremonial academic collar replaced with what the humans called a Hawaiian shirt, apparently standard Earth visitor attire, though he suspected they might be playing another joke on him. The past week had been the most chaotic of his entire academic career. His revised lecture, Humans, Mythology Meets Reality, had broken all Academy attendance records. He'd been interviewed by 17 different news outlets. His previously obscure department was now flooded with student applications. And somehow he'd agreed to a 2-week research expedition to Earth. Having second thoughts, Thomas Jackson appeared beside him, helping Blix load equipment onto the ship. "No, yes, perhaps," Lazex admitted. "I've spent my entire career studying species from afar, controlled environments, carefully documented observations. And now you're diving headfirst into the chaos that is Earth," Rio grinned, patting his upper appendage in what he'd learned was a human gesture of reassurance. "You'll love it. We've arranged tours of 6 continents, 3 underwater research facilities, and tickets to something called WrestleMania." "WrestleMania?" "Cultural research," Yardley said with a suspiciously straight face. "Very important to understanding human society." Chancellor Vorks undulated forward to bid farewell. "Professor Korn, we expect comprehensive reports. This partnership with humanity could redefine interspecies relations for generations to come." Lazex straightened his posture, attempting to reclaim some dignity. I will uphold the Academy's standards, Chancellor. This expedition will be conducted with the utmost scientific rigor and professional. We also got you front row seats to the World Hot Dog Eating Championship, Rio interrupted cheerfully. The what? Lazix blinked all four eyes in confusion. Humans competing to consume the most processed food tubes in 10 minutes, Jackson explained. Another critical cultural ritual. You're joking, Lazix said, then immediately recognized the now familiar expression on their faces. You're not joking. Yardley clapped him on the back, nearly knocking him off balance. Welcome to humanity, Professor, where we've turned being ridiculous into an evolutionary advantage. As Lazix reluctantly boarded the ship, he realized his carefully ordered academic life would never return to normal. And strangely, as the boarding ramp closed behind him and Captain Yardley asked if he wanted to try something called a milkshake. Before takeoff, he found himself not entirely displeased by the prospect. So, Professor Yardley said as the engines hummed to life, any more species you're absolutely certain don't exist? We could make it a galactic tour. For the first time in his life, Professor Lazix Korn did something entirely unprofessional. He laughed.